Hey guys, Chris here from Work to Game, Gaming Kinda, and now Gaming Kinda TV over on Facebook as well. That means that if you are watching this, it is October 13th or later, so I can finally share everything we learned from the media tour, but I do have a couple of disclaimers. First of all, Yoshi P opened his statement to us by saying a thank you to the medical staff over the last few years, and I would like to echo his thoughts. You've been asked of a lot in the fight over the last few years, and if 14 can help be a way to connect with friends or relax after a long day, then I am happy that I can share what we now know about Endwalker coming up very soon, and the devs hope that in some small way that can be a thank you and a place for you to enjoy and appreciate all that you do. Second, a disclaimer about the content itself. We were given brief access to a development build of Endwalker. Any footage I used from this time is development footage and will be labeled as such. Any of this is subject to change, any tooltips, any potencies, anything I show as they put the finishing touches on Endwalker may be subject to adjustments. So as part of talking about physical ranged, one of the first things I'd like to stop and take care of is the role actions. These are the things that they all share, and then just is there anything that's going to generally affect them on an individual job basis, but that really kind of unifies them. So as we go through the role actions, leg graze, slowing targets down their movement speed by applying heavy, second wind, instantly allowing yourself to heal yourself, foot graze, binding the target, Peloton, allowing movement outside of battle, the interruption of a target's action with head graze and arm's length, nullifying knockback and draw-in effects, as well as applying a slow when struck, which reduces the swing speed of enemies. All 6 are identical. This is not true of every single role, but all 6 are identical. Paired with this, because this is physical ranged, I would like to make a note that the physical parity and the magical, that they're back and forth, when they moved over from 1.0 into A Realm Reborn, those were calculated a little bit differently. Imagine them each having a coefficient that they were both multiplied by. And so you have your potency on the tooltip, this imaginary multiplier, your attributes, which we know got stat squished, and that determines the final outgoing damage, which of course is affected by any mitigation on the thing receiving the damage, and that's the amount of damage done. Those coefficients were different for magical and physical, so they did bring physical up to be in line with magical, so that means that if you don't want the number at the end of the equation to go up just across the board universally, by basically nullifying those coefficients so that they're identical now, the potencies on the physical abilities do have to be reduced. And so if you are somebody that shares their time across maybe a caster and a Phys Ranged, just note that some of the potency reductions that you see within physical could be just that excess potency being pulled out of the system. We don't know exactly how that's applied. Is it applied universally across all of the abilities within a job, or do they say here's the total amount of potency per second that a job is doing, let's kind of pull it out in the areas that we think it is best pulled out. We don't know how it got there, but we do know that physical jobs were going to need to receive some sort of potency nerf that isn't going to change the outgoing amount of damage you have. That's to keep you from accidentally receiving some crazy level buff. And so that's the big universal physical ranged changes. You know, your physical counterparts, melee and tanks, they get to now do ranged attacks without breaking melee combos, but there isn't really anything universal like that here. As a matter of fact, this was the role that described in the live letter was seen as, they use the word orthodox with the changes. So it is something where all 3 of these jobs should feel relatively in line with how they did in Shadowbringers. Bard being the one that I think people wanted the most from, and the one that the live letter went the least over, and also the one that they noted would have the most still to go, and they were showing media tour build footage, so it is possible that some of the adjustments, if I had to guess, to things like Bard might not be done, but this should be a pretty good initial showing with what they showed us at the media tour. So just keep in mind, this is all here to flex. It should feel like an extension of, these should feel like quality of life adjustments to Phys Ranged, and this is just kind of the universal truths that are going to group regardless of which physical range job you're in particular honing in on. If you have the equipment for the role and you're spending your time jumping across all 3, you need to know this basic almost lack of information to have some context for where your job might go from here, since at a role level, there isn't a big personality shift like there is with healers being split in two, or with some of the universal changes that are being applied to tanks and to melee. This is really a role where there wasn't that big overhaul, and it didn't have something like Summoner just totally messing with the caster category. This category, when we talk about role actions being so orthodox and so plain, that's actually a pretty good summary for the just generic general improvement. I think all three of these jobs got better. And when we talk about the physical ranged versus Shadowbringers, but I am just rambling about the fact that they didn't change. So with Bard, I will note that this job is one of the ones that already wasn't perfect. Not everybody's been identically happy with every version of Bard that we've had over the years. And my knowledge of it is not perfect. So I will focus on what changed. I will focus on what got lowered as a potency, because within physical we expect that. We're going to start with what didn't change. Then we're going to move into what did change as far as buffs or something that changed in the way it functions. And then we're going to move into what is new. So I will report on this the way I do a live letter, where I am sharing the news with you. And then if you have direct resources for Bard, I encourage you to go dive as far into that job as possible. So with what did not change, repelling shot as a jump away did not change. I think mobility, if anything, has been something that's been added to across a number of jobs this time around. So I don't really see them needing to have a disengage be affected in any way. Warden's Pay on Troubadour and Nature's Min stayed the same. Mitigation is something that's hard to gauge without access to level 90 content. So we really don't know, do we feel like we need more of it? Do we feel like we have the right amount of it? It's really hard to tell with how little time and the type of content that we had access to at the Media Tour. Shadowbite is AoE Sidewinder, and while it did not change its single target, will be in the got weaker section here. So that is kind of note that it got separated, as opposed to a lot of jobs when one falls, so does the other. Moving on to what did get weaker. Keep in mind that physical potencies, I've said this a few times now, were reduced due to a back-end change to be brought in line with magical. So some or all of a reduction might actually just be absorbed by that. And so what I would like to note here is a couple of the percentage drops, because it's interesting to see what abilities dropped more than others, knowing that all of these numbers could flex not at all or a little bit by the time we get to the go live day. Straight shot went down by 20 to a new potency of 180, making this in that 10 to 15% range. So that's something we're going to see a lot of. Its upgraded version, Refulgent Arrow, also dropped, going from 340 to 280, but I would say that straight shot can be triggered by a lot more things now. So we're going to see a lot more of it in your rotation. So I would expect a drop, even if there was not the physical parity thing. Venomous Bite dropped in half to 15 for its dot damage. We're seeing dots across most of the game get a reduction at like a first glance. It feels like a lot of dots got hit. But its base damage stayed the same. Wind Bite is the exact same percentage drop, getting cut in half from 40 to 20. And we'll talk about how this got better when we upgrade these abilities a little bit further on. Bloodletter dropped by 20% from 120 to 150, and the AoE version, Reign of Death, dropped a similar amount by going from 130 to 100. Imperial Arrow dropped from 230 to 200, keeping us in that 10 to 15% range. So it might be a small indicator of how the physical potency is affecting this particular job that we're already starting to see a pattern, but it'll be hard to tell because they're having to also balance the fact that we've got some new stuff coming in. The Sidewinder stayed the exact same with following this exact trend where the dot dropped from 350 to 300 for both, and this is odd only because the AoE version did not change. So when we talk about that's just things that got weaker, what are things that just changed? They just feel different. Heavy Shot is dropping from 180 to 150, but remember with physical taking a hit, we'll just keep saying that. The buff allows you to hit Straight Shot now lasts 30 seconds. In general, it feels like things are allowing you to extend combos longer so that you can adjust to mechanics a little cleaner without having to worry about something fell off. So instead of 10 seconds, it jumping to 30 might not make a big difference, except when it does. Its upgraded version, Burst Shot, followed this pattern, so it has a potency drop from 250 to 220, but I did want to note that because when it makes you ready for that straight shot, you now have a longer window there, and that's kind of different. In line with this, Barrage did not change, except that it now has that straight shot ready to 30 seconds instead of 10. Iron Jaws actually added a 35% chance to make you straight shot ready. We're going to see a lot of that. Caustic Bite, like other dots, kept the same base damage, dropped the dot potency, but this time we add yet another 35% chance at triggering that straight shot. This is an upgrade from Venomous Bite, so like you're probably seeing a little bit of a theme here so far. Storm's Bite is going to follow this trend by upgrading Caustic Bite, but losing half of its Shadowbringer's potency in trade for adding another 35% chance to trigger straight shot ready. Raging Strikes dropped from 80 seconds to be in line with that 60 seconds. They said a number of abilities would be dropping to be more in line with these standard burst windows so that you felt a similar cadence as you jump job to job. It will not be true of all buffs, but they did warn us many cooldowns would do this. Quick Knock dropped by a third. Okay, so we went from 150 all the way down to 100, but we gained a 30% chance to reset our instant, single, and AoE abilities. This is swapped out. We're going to upgrade this at level 82, so we'll see Quick Knock fall off the bar. Mage's Ballad, the duration went up from 30 seconds to 45 seconds. The chance to reset instant dot ticks doubled from 20% to 40%, and it's now going to grant Mage's Coda, which for now, just store that in your mind as that's going to be a sticker on the right side of your gauge. Wanderer's Minuet, duration, 45 seconds. Proc chance, to build stacks for use with Pitch Perfect. Went from 20 to 40%. Now we've got a second sticker, this one being called Wanderer's Coda. While Wanderer's Minuet is up, you can cast Pitch Perfect. The base potency stayed the same, but the second and third stack got smaller, so the max potency on these went from 450 down to 360. Armor's Paeon also went up to 45 seconds, proc rate 20 to 40, giving us our final sticker called Army's Coda. You'll hold on to all three of these stickers for just a little bit until we get into the What's New section. During any of these three songs, you can buff direct hit from what was just 15 seconds up to 20 seconds. So that's a better amount of buff going out. Apex Arrow got a potency reduction from 120 to 100, but it was up to a max of 600, now only being to a max of 500. So if executed at 80 or higher on the gauge, this will take you into a new ability, Blast Arrow. So we're going to see some of this potency come back in the brief but final section, What is New? Obviously, first let's talk about Blast Arrow, because that's where we left off. This is a big new line AoE. It's going to hit for high-end, a ton of high-end damage, and so that Apex Arrow, you're going to want to max that out, because that's where this Blast Arrow comes in. Landon's Bite will be the Quick Knock upgrade that I mentioned earlier, and this will add just another chance to reset instants. There's a ton of instant kind of procs, so it should feel more along the cadence of something like Dancer, where there's a lot of procs going on. You're resetting your straight arrow all the time, so we've just got things resetting everywhere. So all the potency gain in this job is that we're going to be seeing some of these abilities that were up every once in a while being up a lot more often. As our last stop, let's talk about these stickers, okay? These are the songs. We now are going to basically get a straight up boost at max, assuming you have all three stickers. This is going to be 5% damage dealt by everybody within 20 yards, so it's basically an Astro Divination, kind of. So this is a massive raid buff, and I think this right here is what allows Bard to be a relevant slot in a raid group. So, with role actions out of the way, let's talk about Machinist. To start, I will note that Phys Ranged is not what I main, and so I'll be reporting on this on the way just like we do on a live letter. I'm going to break this into a couple of sections. First, what did not change, what stayed the same. That's notable because Physical did take a back-end change to potencies where it falls to get it more in line with the way they were calculating magical. So we expect physical potencies to go down. So anything that did not go down, that's technically a buff. Then we're going to talk about what got weaker. We're going to get the bad news out of the way. And then after that, we're going to talk about what just changed, what's just different. Maybe it got a buff, maybe it just works a little bit differently. And then we'll get to the new stuff in that context, because a lot of times these nerf type feelings. Some of them, I think it's because not only was there a parity adjustment, but there also was, there's new abilities being added that might have some overlap with old ones. So we can pull potency out of them and put that potency into the new abilities, because some of the new abilities on some of these jobs hit really hard. So what did not change? Hypercharge. Gauge did not change on its own. Much like Enmity on tanks, Gauge did not change, but plenty will feel new with us getting our gauge, managing our gauge, and what we use it on. But the gauge itself did not change. In that category, I would also go ahead and note that barrel stabilizer didn't change, so it's just going to be more gauge as it was. Automaton Queen, as a tooltip, technically also did not change, but stay till the end for the what's new section, because Queen is going to be a big part of that. So what got weaker? Let's get the bad news out of the way here. Keep in mind, potencies, don't be surprised that these potencies, I mean, this had to happen. Split shot. Physical jobs losing potency on their opener has not been atypical, but it's not necessarily a promise. This was a drop from 180 to 140, so a little over 20%. That's on the higher end, but not the highest, but I think that percentage is going to be pretty consistent across Phys Ranged. Heated split shot or upgraded version dropped from 220 to 200, which is actually smaller. So this percentage drop actually gets less after you cross level 60 in that upgrades. Slug shot, we're going to see the other pattern that we see on abilities like this. Base potency did not drop, but combo action potency did. We do have a level 84 trait that's bumping up our heated shots. So keep in mind with the heated shots when I'm saying that their base potency and things like that did not drop. I don't have screenshots of what it looks like before level 84, and so I'm just comparing current level 80 to new level 90, and I don't really know what happens in between. Which, given the physical adjustment, this feels like a buff on the base potency end, but the combo action dropped from 260 all the way down to 210. Heated slug shot, the upgraded version, non-combo potency actually increased, but then combo action decreased from 330 down to 280. Clean shot combo dropped from 340 to 270, and the heated clean shot dropped from 440 to 360. This means our max level combo in Shadowbringers was 920 potency, and Endwalker could be just 840. It's not a crazy drop, but, you know, we don't know how much of that was just the parity adjustment, because it is a pretty noticeable drop. Hotshot's going to drop from 300 down to 240, and its upgraded version, Air Anchor, dropped from 700 all the way to 550. Those are both huge hits because they are large potencies to start with. But the percentages really aren't out of line, with that being a 20% and then a just over 20% drop. Gauss Round dropped from 150 to 120, so the 20% continues. Ricochet from 150 down to 120 once again, 20%. And 150 down to 140, which is pretty small. So, like, it's not that crazy that these are all dropping by 20 or less. So Spread Shot as our AoE base ability drops from 180 to 140. Roughly 20% for the AoE as well. Was not sure if AoE and single target would line up here, but we're going to get some good stuff for that in the end, so to see AoE dropping doesn't shock me. Heated Blast dropped from 220 to 190, slightly less than 15%, that's better. Rook Auto Target from 80 to 70. Wildfire from 200 to 150, which basically just canceled out the old level 78 trait. Detonator did not change, but that's because the changes are noted on Wildfire. Auto Crossbow dropped from 180 to 140, which is just over 20%. Drill from 700 to 550. Bioblaster, our AoE drill, dropped from 60 to 50, but its dot also dropped from 60 to 50. Flamethrower dropped from 100 to 80, so there's our 20%, showing itself again. Rook Overdrive did not change, but Rook Overload did. So this really got weaker. What's odd about these is I would think they should be the same number. So one of these is true. I'd bet on the reduction being the true number. I'd bet on the Rook Overload. I'd bet on the 400 dropping to 320. That lines up with the 20%. I think that's where that is. I think it's odd that those tooltips don't align. Queen Overdrive shows 800 to 620, and Pile Bunker lines up. And so I think that's true. So the Rook, I think there's something odd with the tooltips there. It is an early build. They're not flawless. While on the topic of Queen, Arm Punch went from 150 to 120, and Roller Dash from 300 to 240, which notably is the 20%-ish we've seen this whole section. Now let's talk about what just changed. Reassemble. Got charges. We now have 2 charges here. I like the charge system. I do think it's odd that the recast timer on this stayed at 55 seconds instead of moving to be more in line with 30 or 60, but they did say not all abilities would adjust their recast timers. This won't take place till level 84, so keep that in mind when you're thinking about how this will feel in scaled content. Tactician at 88 will drop to just a 90-second cooldown from 120. So those are kind of the 2 big changes there. We're already very quickly moving into what's new. So let's just go ahead and dive into why we lost all this potency besides the parity adjustment. At 82, we're going to upgrade Spread Shot into Scattergun. Pretty cool. At 86, Queen is going to do Crowned Collider after Pile Bunker Finisher. This is massive additional potency that did not exist prior. And then last up, what we all waited for, that people were excited, coming out of the job action trailer, Chainsaw. This is a line AoE once every minute. You're going to use it every minute. It's good potency. It's additional gauge. Chainsaw, very, very cool. So coming off the role actions, Dancer. To start, I'm going to note that this job, as well as the others, that I talked about in this section, physical ranged, is not where I'm a main tank, and so this is a pretty big departure for me. So I'm going to report on this the way I would a live letter, and we're going to break this down into what did not change, what got weaker, what did change, meaning it got stronger or just different, and then talk about the new stuff. So with what did not change, what is staying the exact same? Standard step. This did not change, but the act of dancing got cleaner with your AoE and single target buttons as far as just the way your hotbars are utilized. This will be most noticeable to people who already feel that they're crammed on the number of buttons they feel comfortable pressing while moving or things like that, or for controller players. Technical step did not change either, but just note that across the board, this is also going to feel cleaner, especially for players that really feel like I need to be in a hotbar mindset for AoE or a hotbar mindset for single target, and they're having trouble kind of jumping back and forth for the steps. The steps, imboete, in entrechat, jet, pirouette, however you say all of those, they didn't change. But you know, they are going to appear on your AoE buttons as well. That's what the change is. They're on your single target buttons like they always were. They're now also on your AoE buttons. So you're going to have 2 different buttons that push each one. And what that's going to allow for is if you're in AoE and you press a step, you're going to stay on those AoE buttons if that's what's most convenient for you. If you're in single target, you're going to stay on those single targets. If you want to keep doing it the way you can do it, they're identical buttons. It's just offering another way to feel comfortable. Fan Dance 1 and 2 did not change, but the proc duration extended from 20 to 30 seconds. So this is something that we're seeing across the board. Combos, now you have 30 seconds before the combo thing falls off. We're seeing Melee make it to where tanks and Melee are no longer breaking combos with their ranged attacks. We're seeing proc, when something procs and you have a certain amount of time to press an ability like this or like on Bard, those are extending. And so this is right in line with that, extending from 20 to 30 seconds. We're going to see this repeatedly, so just expect that to be on just about everything. 3 doesn't have a duration, so it's just literally identical here. And on Vaunt didn't change. So there's lots of movement being added across other jobs. So I would expect encounters to be something that we see a lot more movement in this time around. So while it did not change, it may feel more useful or a bigger part of your life than it did before. That would not surprise me. We'll just have to see. Curing Waltz did not change. Closed Position did not change, but I think Dance Partner is something that really didn't need to change. That's one of the things that I think people would want to just hold on to the way it is. Keep in mind that the proc names swapped to make it cleaner, but they didn't really seem to make an actual difference. We saw this also on things like Warrior, where now, because their proc ability used to be tied to an ability, so that proc was named after that ability, now that multiple things can trigger it, it needs its own proc name, but it's doing the same thing. So with that, let's move into what got weaker. Let's get the bad news out of the way. Keep in mind that physical potencies were reduced because of a back-end change that brought behind-the-scenes numbers in line with magical, so some part or any of the reduction might not actually be a lower potency. It might just be keeping the job where it was. We don't know what that percentage is. Just kind of keep that in the back of your head, especially if you're spending your time between here and a magical class. Cascade went from 250 down to 180. Note that the proc will go up to that 30 seconds. Proc window's getting longer all over the place. Fountain, while the base potency did not drop, the combo potency did drop from 300 to 240, which is another trend we're seeing, where people who are just learning a job and make a mistake, they will not suffer from base potencies dropping. Those are getting pushed up, and many times due to traits, so that won't necessarily be true in all synced content, but max level characters are going to see a base potency there, but then the combo potency drops down, so people who are executing perfect rotations are no longer being rewarded by as much of a potency difference, but they're being rewarded by other things, because a lot of these jobs got new stuff added that you're going to get to see more of if you're doing your job correctly. Windmill dropped from 150 to 100. That's a massive percentage reduction. Proc window up to 30. So just note that that's the quality of life adjustment across the board. With this upgrading like Cascade, so you can either use AoE or single target. So this is going to be the first of those that you're going to see those upgrading. Reverse Cascade from 300 down to 240. Another 20% drop. These percentages felt large, but I also, we've seen that across Machinist and on Bard. I think it'll all add up by the time it's done, because we are adding new stuff. It's hard to say just off of a dummy on a tour. So this is kind of where the idea is, and all these potencies are subject to change. But I expect the mentality of these abilities to be the thing that continues through into November. Blade Shower continues the pattern. Base potency stays. This time a 30% drop in combo potency, and the duration extended. We'll just keep calling this the usual. And so Fountain Fall got the usual, but only a 15% reduction there. So better. And now that I've mentioned the standard and technical step, skill step, technical and standard step as skills did not change, but executing them was cleaner on the hotbar. The standard and technical finish, however, did change. Both lost potency, and the technical finish now has a flourishing piece added on it to the end, and that's going to allow one of the new abilities to be used. We'll get there. Saber Dance dropped from 600 to 480. Just a big drop. Now let's talk about what just is different. Rising Windmill just changed. It used to do a heavy hit of 300 to the first target and 50% less remaining. Now it's just a flat 140 all the way around. This button also upgrades, just a reminder. Blood Shower got the exact same thing, doing 350 to the first, and now it's going to be down to 180, but that's going to be 180 to everybody. Shield Samba dropping from 120 down to just 90 seconds. We're seeing some cooldowns adjust down to 90s, 60s, 30s where it makes sense. That's not all abilities, but that is a relatively standard thing on recast timers. Devilment mostly stayed the same, but wanted to note here that it grants Flourishing Starfall for 30 seconds, and we're going to need to hold on to that buff for at least 30 seconds while we get to the new section. Flourish looks different, but only because the effect name changed. Otherwise, it's the same, but I did want to note that here. Those effect names changing, what you're seeing up there in the proc, that's going to be something you're going to see on jobs where they're trying to clean up what triggers what. They're saying, hey, multiple things might be able to trigger this, or this is something you're tracking across AoE and single target. Let's give it its own name. So we're seeing across the board where things are just getting cleaned up so that it doesn't get so confusing when you're like, well, I didn't use that ability. The perks are getting cleaner names. Improvisation is likely one of the single biggest differences in a single ability on Dancer, and now wants you to stack with as many friends as possible. That's the change. So, what is new? Fan Dance 4. 1 and 2 are under Fourfold Feathers. 3 is under Flourishing Fan Dance, and now we have a Fourfold Fan giving us a new Fan Dance cone that we can use. Now, when you finish Technical Finish, we're going to get a buff that will let us perform Tilana with the Technical Finish button on your bar simply being pressed one more time. Upgrading buttons and having things with traits, that's the trend. This is Trait Walker. We are swapping things out with traits. We're not putting more buttons to bloat. We're saying, hey, you're only using that button every once in a while. Now, you would never be using these at the same time because you would have to trigger this first and then press that. So why don't you just have that button pressed one additional time in your rotation? We get more use out of the same number of buttons, not just add this enormous number of buttons that you each press only one time every however many seconds. Devilment added an effect called Flourishing Starfall, okay, remember? And that's going to let us use Starfall Dance. This is a line AoE. This is our level 90 ability, and it's going to be the big shiny thing that you saw in the job action trailer. So, Phys Ranged, overall thoughts. Orthodox changes was the live letter statement. Orthodox changes was the statement that they made, that they said they're not really changing that much. And I think that's very true. I think that they very notably did not change that much. I think that across the board, it feels like there's these 15-20% drops in potencies everywhere, but then there's new abilities adding potency to some of those things. It feels like, in general, they're rewarding combos this expansion for DPS with big, shiny new abilities. You'll get to do them more if you're doing your rotation better, less if you're not, and that's where they're going to make up for it, and the combo potency itself will not be the difference. It'll be the big finishers that pulls those players ahead in total potency per second, which is effectively, if you neutralize for gear, what DPS is, right? Potency per second times your attributes is how we get DPS per second. So if you have two identically geared players, it's literally a question of potency per second. The gap between broken combos and combo actions is narrower than before, but there are big shiny things if you're better about managing your combos, managing your gauges, managing your stacks, managing your buff windows. And I think my big fear for this category is that they have made the entire raid across the board. They have made more windows centered on those 30, 60, 90 intervals. And as a set of jobs that are expected to buff the raid, one of my concerns is how frustrated other players are going to be if you are the reason that they don't get their window. This is something Ren mentioned when we were talking about tanks, and I think it's going to be directed at Phys Ranged. I think that's where the frustration is going to be, because that's where a lot of these buffs come from. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how the different DPS fares, what gets slotted, what gets kind of deemed the trash job, because I can promise that people are going to watch all of this stuff and decide that one of these jobs, the sky is falling, even though none of these numbers are final, and we don't have the content to go with it. People are going to decide that one of these jobs is brokenly overpowered. And the best is when people are 100% sure at an initial glance, with no extra math, effort, verification, validation, the remainder of the picture, which the other half of the picture is the content itself, which we do not have. Without all of that, they're immediately going to be convinced how the entire next 2 years is going to go, every single patch cycle, even though there has been no evidence to ever suggest that Square Enix is not willing to continually seek balance, continually make sure that every single job can get clear of every single tier, can be present in every single ultimate. They can all do everything. So I think my concern in this category is that Bard's going to be one that takes a lot of heat. You know, Dancer is going to be seen as not getting enough changes because it was all basically quality of life. Machinist, I think, as far as number of changes, maybe came out the most visually ahead. I don't know. I think the big winner in how it plays as somebody that's not a Phys Ranged main is what feels the most natural when I hop into it. I think Bard will feel very natural, but I think Dancer just felt so freaking good. I think of the set, I would probably, if I was going to gear out my Phys Ranged by going into raids, to get weekly lockouts as a Phys Ranged, I would go in as a Dancer. It feels really good. It just does. I don't know how to explain it. So I don't really have an immense amount to say on this roll, because honestly, it doesn't feel like an immensely wild change. The potency drops when you factor for the physical parity is in line. When you compare this with the melee changes, when you compare this with the tank changes, when you compare this with the caster changes, when you compare this to Sage and the healers, Phys Ranged is just something that existed in Shadowbringers and will continue to exist in Endwalker. These jobs change the least. I think individually, on paper, Every single job in the game it got something worth being excited about versus Shadowbringers version. But we are all on October 13th and beyond sitting down around the Christmas tree or whatever holiday your family celebrates where everybody might get a little something, and you're all opening up gifts, and you all got something that did improve your life, but you're looking over and like you got a sibling that got like a brand new TV, and a sibling that got a car, and another sibling that got you know, an Xbox Series X, and you got, I mean, new toothbrushes, and like, I'm glad you got them. It's important. You should be getting new ones from time to time. But compared to the other jobs, I will say this job does feel the most orthodox, the most continuation of. And they did say that with the changes, they were relatively happy with where Shadowbringers was, and so they were looking to carry those strengths forward, not just hit reset. Don't break what's not broken. So Phys Ranged across the board feels like the area that they were most happy with. They did note that it was the area still most under development, so I do expect that if there is going to be an area that potencies change a lot based on an entire role between the Media Tour build and November 19th, I would place my non-existent bet money on Phys Ranged being an area to watch for that, but it doesn't mean that's a promise. And I think a lot of Phys Ranged, with how mobile they are, with how the proc rates are percentage chances, when you see all of that, I think that you have to look at Phys Ranged as a more situational, reaction-based DPS job, compared to something that's much more straightforward. It's not that Melee doesn't have that, but it's not that, you know, Red Mage doesn't have that. But like, compared to some of these other jobs, like, it just feels like across the board, what makes Phys Ranged fun to play is how actively part of the battle content you feel when playing it. You're in it. You're out of it. You're where you want to be. You're making your other players better. You're doing your thing. You're launching projectiles. You've got a clean view of the arena if you want it. You're in the action if you want it. Some of these jobs, you know, like, because of the way they cast their AoE versus their range, they kind of force you to have a little bit of variety in where you're standing. They feel good. But I think Phys Ranged is a feeling. And so I do think that with these changes, while they are orthodox on paper, the one remaining thing is I want to hold out and see what do they feel like in the action. And in the action is not something I got a chance to do during the Media Tour build. When I look at the amount of content we had available to us in the Media Tour build and say, what if they'd given me a whole nother day of Media Tour coverage? I don't know that if they'd said you can have one more day, but you have to use it entirely on Phys Ranged, I don't know that that would have answered that question. That question needs to be answered by being in level 90 battle content. It needs to be answered by being in level 90 Fate trains. It needs to be answered by being in level 90 dungeons, level 90 Savage raids, level 90 Alliance raids where there's just chaos. These are places that Phys Ranged feels good. This is where I'm jealous as a tank to see them off flinging around over there. And especially when the encounter gets really nasty and the melee are locked in the action with me, I'm watching Phys Ranged just go sailing by. And so I think that the other caveat to this category is if there's a category not worth being excited about just because a tooltip reveal, this is it. This is the role action that when you see the tooltips and you see the animations, casters get to have the coolest animations. They're big explosions. You know, tanks and healers are about these spells. What is it that you're doing for the party? Melee have these big, elaborate combos and these positionals, so I need to read it because it's just a ton of information. But Phys Ranged, you read all this stuff and you go, yeah, I think I got it. Let me hop in there and find out. And so I think the tooltips on their own aren't giving me the whole picture. So I think my lack of excitement is because the excitement from Phys Ranged is something that builds. It's something that the more time I spend on my Phys Ranged, the more I like them. As opposed to some jobs where the amount I like them on day one, it is either flat or going down from there. This is like, no, every moment I spend on Phys Ranged, I like them a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And so it tells me that given enough time, maybe I do love Phys Ranged, and I just need to spend more time with them. And I'm hoping that's what Endwalker gives me an excuse to do.